First is sticking to the basics. Stick to the basics. We have Mahan telling us about the emphasis of sea power. And he gives out the example of Britain. How Britain exploited the sea power and its strategic strategic location of an island. British Industrial Revolution, the advancement, the development of Britain has a lot to do, and the sustenance of democracy, glorious revolution, the mannerisms with British speak has a lot to do with the global dynamics and British power. Macintyre gave out this theory of land-based power, which is France. France exploited its land frontiers in order to be a developed superpower, when Napoleon exploited the theory of continentality. We also called as the Rimland theory, which is to take control of the Eurasian mainland. Now here's my suggestion. Let's look at the Tropic of Cancer that passes and divides India, that cuts India into two. The northern part of India, the northern states of India, could adhere to Macintyre's land-based theory. The peninsula of India, the southern states of India, could well in itself imagine it to be a different block and work on the sea-based power, and could adhere to Macintyre's theory. With this, we introduce specialization with North Indian states and South Indian states. Now, this is a food for thought. I haven't read this anywhere, but I want all of you to take this and to think on this. The Tropic of India cuts India into two, and the northern states have a land frontier, the southern states have the sea frontier. We could exploit the sea frontier on the southern part and the north frontier on the northern part. So, in order to introduce more specialization in Indian foreign policy. Then, with respect to geography, geography also plays an important role. Sticking to basics is the first. Respecting the geography is my second key takeaway from all of this. Respecting geography is the most important thing that we could do in terms of foreign policy, although there is geoeconomics that has taken the space of geography. But having said that, geography remains very, very important. The third key takeaway that I have from all of this is taking a road that is less traveled by. To act as a smart power. Like how APJ says, APJ Abdul Kalam had this quote, wherein he says, like how all birds find shelter during a rain, eagle flies above the skies to avoid the rain. So this is smartness again. With the compulsions of domestic foreign policy and the kind of developing nature that we have, we largely have to be a smart power in terms of changing our attitude, in terms of changing our mindset, so on and so forth. The fourth key takeaway that I have from all of this is learning from history. Respecting geography, learning from history. There is a need to buy time. What do I mean by buying time? What do I mean by purchasing time? You purchase time. Sun Tzu has this quote, the Chinese philosopher. He says, you go to a war only when you are sure of winning. Otherwise, you don't go to a war. Because we all know the ramifications of war. A country, when it goes to a war, it takes the country backwards by 10 years. And with all the development, like how this pandemic is also called a war, it takes our country backwards. It just undoes all the development that we've done and all the hard work that we've done for so many years. So this again, war is no solution for a developing country like India. At any cost, at just about any cost. Because we cannot afford to lose out on all the gains that we've made for the 75 years. This is respecting history. Calibrated risk-taking is another of my key takeaways from this. There is a need of calibrated risk-taking. When we respect geography, when we respect history, we derive lessons from history. Hitler was a great tactician. Hitler was a great strategist. But he made a very tactical blunder in the Second World War, which essentially became a reason for the fall of Germany. He attacked Russia in winters. There was too much snow. The soldiers just couldn't take the cold. And this was a very simple reason. For the demoralization of German forces. Next, the last key takeaway that I have is compulsions and choices. You have compulsions in life and you have choices to make in life. Also in the journey of a nation, I feel there are compulsions and there are choices. Now, you decide some and some things are decided for you. Right? So again, looking at this from this perspective, in 1960s, Raghuram Rajan opines that we should have started with exporting just on the lines of the East Asian tigers, of Thailand, of all these countries, of ASEAN countries, how they, boldly exported and emerged. Singapore, for example, largely exported in 1960s. There was a choice to make. Should we go for large-scale exports in 1960 or should we go for, self-reliance and protectionism? We went for self-reliance and protectionism. It had its own positives and negatives. But had we gone for exports, large booming exports, and we all know Chinese economy is largely based on exports. They hugely made in China products everywhere. This was a decision to make in 1960s. So you either say yes, you either say no. I think these are decisive moments in history that decide the course of a nation. These are some of my key takeaways from the Indian foreign policy. Let me just very briefly touch upon the aspects of some of the challenges that face us in the modern day. For example, China. Kanti Bajpai does argue that we have a 4P problem with China. That is perception, perimeters, partnership, and power asymmetry. It's a little unfair for us to compare ourselves with China. China is 5 times the economy of India. If India is 20 units, China is 100. If India is, it's 5 times the economy of China. So the cake, the economic pie of China is 5 times that of India. So if Indian GDP is 3 trillion, or say about 2.7, 2.9, approximately 2.9 trillion put all together, the Chinese economy is 5 times or more in purchasing parity terms. It's hugely big in terms of economy and resources. So this power asymmetry, and we have to accept this fact. And once we accept and give recognition to this fact, we'll be able to chart out a way to tackle a power that is powerful than us. So this again, Ambassador Nirupama Rao says that there is a need of multi-alignment and of dexterity in transacting foreign relations with China. There is an assertive China right now, and a new axis of China and Russia is on the rise. A new axis of China, Pakistan, and with the takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan, a new axis is on the rise, which just sits on the top of the Indian head. And the most vulnerable Indian part, that is the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, are situated just on the border of that region. It's a vulnerable state to be in. It's a challenge that we face, that the Mauryas face, that the Nandas face, that the Guptas face, that the Mughals face, that the Delhi Sultanate face, that New Delhi faces today. And we require a different approach to deal with that challenge. With the challenge of China comes also the challenge of India's neighborhood. There is red tapeism, slow implementation of projects in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, right? M.K. Narayanan, he suggests that, India's neighborhood impacts India geopolitically, geoeconomically, geostrategically, and also psychologically. Look at the countries that are besides India. It's a challenge to have small countries. Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. These are small countries. The nature of having small countries in front of a huge giant that is India is the basic equation of those countries they are basically insecure countries. Why? Because they're situated, sandwiched between Himalayas on the one side and India on the other. Sandwiched between China on one side and India on the other. What is the identity that is left? The basic premise. Look at the world from the viewpoint of Nepal. Look at the world from the viewpoint of Bhutan. It's a very insecure place to be in. And I think the solution again lies with what Mr. Gujral had said and given in the form of Gujral Doctrine. Right? So all of this balance, the checkbook diplomacy of China that it enjoys, has to be tackled with the vaccine diplomacy of India, which was, according to me, an excellent move of exporting vaccines, which was obviously, looking in retrospect now with the lack of vision and, not being able to calculate the second wave, proved out to be otherwise. But still, I would say that it is important. It is important to export vaccines. It is important to exercise vaccine diplomacy. The next important challenge of India, right from its inception, has been the challenge of Pakistan. TV Paul has rightly argued that India is bigger than Pakistan, but it is not big enough to compel Pak to do its will. It's bigger than Pakistan, but it's not big enough to compel Pakistan, to arm twist Pakistan, and to force Pakistan to do what it wants. So Pakistan has very tactically used its alliances. It has very tactically used nuclear weapons. It has very tactically used non-conventional military strategies to compensate the might of India by aligning with China first, aligning with the United States first, and now aligning with China. And now, with the recent advent of Taliban, it also exercises substantial amount of importance in Afghanistan. It's a huge, grave strategic loss with Taliban taking over Afghanistan, because Taliban, again, is a puppet institution in the hands of the Pakistani agency ISI. So it's again this maneuvering and deftness that is required. So the challenges are grave. The next big important challenge before India is the challenge of Afghanistan. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, Afghanistan has been the graveyard of empires. Every empire that enters Afghanistan falls. It's a land. It's the geography of Afghanistan. Look at the British. The British could conquer every land. They could never ever rule in Afghanistan. Afghanistan received independence in 1918, 1919. The British tried to capture Afghanistan, failed massively in the first war, failed massively in the second war. The Soviets entered Afghanistan 1970-80, fell, left, failed, and went back. The USA entered Afghanistan in 2001, 2021, they're leaving, they've left. It's been the graveyard of every empire. Every empire that tries to enter Afghanistan loses its credibility. Another power that has lost heavily in Afghanistan besides India is the United States of America in terms of credibility, the sheer morality, the sheer humanness and the human rights aspect of it. The superpower which was vying to be the frontier, the safeguarder of human rights, has fallen on its face in Afghanistan, failed miserably, with the pictures that come out from the airports of Afghanistan for everyone to see. So this again is a new challenge that it presents. This again, that the global deftness, maneuvering and all of this. And like I already told you, that we find ourselves similarly situated in a situation which we were in 1947. That is having to choose between two blocks. And when two blocks of India, this China and the America, if they crystallize, we would still be having a choice with choosing one of these blocks. Would we go for non-alignment? Would we go for multi-alignment? Would we choose both? Would we choose one? That is a question that is to be decided. Similar kind of pattern, again, going back to history, there was, when Delhi Sultanate was there, on the northern side, when Mongolia, Genghis Khan was ruling, always Delhi has had to make a choice between choosing two powers. We've always had to make choice, maneuver, deftness, with a lot of deftness and with a lot of detailing, and hedge our foreign policy. So with all this and more, lastly, I come to the last part of my talk on foreign policy, which is my vision on India's foreign policy. First is the first vision that I would want to present according to my own analysis and how I see things. It's a very personalized vision. All of you are welcome to disagree. In fact, I would like and I would love if someone disagrees, because I don't want anyone to agree. I want all of you to disagree. That the first vision or the first potential that India could tap on is to move towards Africa. This is a land of opportunities. Earlier, Africa was looked at as, a land just for the resources, and the place where we could have just our place from where we could just have our resources. But now India should look at Africa in terms of land of opportunities, emerging technologies, also, cooperation in terms of health, space, digital technology, trade, which is about $55 billion, right? We have huge potential to develop trade relations with Africa. It's also, according to study done by Gateway House study, engagement of external powers in Africa is, again, many external powers. There is this scramble of Africa. Many of these external powers are in some way exercising neo-colonialism in Africa, in terms of diamonds, in terms of many natural institutions, many natural resources that Africa has. Again, India, there are issues with respect to Africa and its engagement with Africa in terms of, say, privacy, fundamentalism, also competition with China. But we also have huge potentials in terms of the blue economy that you have, the federalization of foreign policy, the para-diplomacy that could be done with Africa, the African market that could be tapped, because Indian market is not, it's not for forever. The demographic dividend that we enjoy is not forever. The next big thing is Africa. So just like I was telling you, the first mover's advantage, or buying time or purchasing time, I think this is the right time, or even a little late, to enter and engage dynamically with Africa. Next learning or vision that I have for foreign policy is courage and deception. The next most important thing that we could do as an Indian nation or Indian foreign policy is to engage with Taiwan. Taiwan, again, we can cooperate in agriculture, investment, civil aviation, industrial cooperation. We have a shared faith in freedom, human rights, justice, preamble, all these preambling values. We could also cooperate with them in terms of renewables, biochemicals, help in air pollution, organic farming, research and development, need of people-to-people contact, and also need to exploit our Buddhist circuit that we are building through the schemes of tourism sector in India. Taiwan is again a world leader in semiconductors, electricals, construction, petrochemicals and machine. And that is the need of India going forward. When India is to enter a digital revolution, industrial revolution 4.0, the era of supercomputers, the era of digital technology, so on and so forth, Taiwan could be a well-match, a very good partner for India to cooperate with. The next big important thing for India is, of course, Quad. And lastly, the next big important thing for India is also Latin America. Just like Africa, we could engage with Latin America. There is need for greater federalization, foreign policy, and a lot of engagement with Mercosur, the cooperative arrangement in the Latin American continent, FTA with Chile. Latin America is again a competition area with China, just like Africa, but we could exercise a first mover's advantage in Latin America as well. So all of this, and the point that I was trying to make, that India has always had to make a choice. India also has to make a choice in Latin America and cleverly and deftly maneuver between Brazil and Argentina, who are the rivals in Latin America. So needing to balance both these sides and navigate the choppy waters of these rivals vying for regional power in Latin America. Both of these powers are competitive, Brazil, Argentina. The West Asian dynamics are changing. The West Asian and the Middle Eastern dynamics are hugely changing. In terms now, as Talmiz Ahmad, the ambassador of India's Republic, again, he has analyzed the situation well in terms of saying that the Iranians and the Saudis are talking now through back channel diplomacy. Arch rivals are talking in terms of back channel diplomacy. Turkey and Egypt had diplomatic meeting in Cairo, and they are talking now, who are on the regional opposite sides of any region. So India needs to again craftily face this fluidity that is taking place in West Asia. So the world is continuously changing, and our educative minds has to be well equipped with changes taking place every day. First is to form an all India identity, is to be an Indian in spirit, and to be able to have that mind which is well adjusted to the changes that are taking place, which is crafty, which is maneuvery, which is diplomatic in terms of foreign policy, and the skill sets that are required for foreign policy to operate foreign policy. The new coalition, according to me, which could emerge, and this is just a thought of mine, since this is a platform for opinion building and maybe all of you could think on this line, is the platform of FIDS countries. Just like what we have a platform called BRICS, we could emerge with a platform called FIDS, which is France, India, Japan and South Korea. Now France, Japan and South Korea are countries which have least amount of friction with India. France, Japan, like best friends of India. Shinzo Abe in his book, that is Towards a Beautiful Country, has written an excerpt. He said, I would not be surprised if Japan-India relations overtake Japan-United States relation, Japan-China relations in the next 10 years. Such is the relation dynamic between India and Japan. If we are not able to, on our own calibrate and maneuver all these world affairs, we could form this FIDS alliance that could be there, along with Japan, South Korea, and France. Another of my learning, the last part of my learning of all of this is, I'm going to take a clue from the Viceroy of Britain and his foreign policy, that is Lord Curzon. C. Raja Mohan, a Curzonian himself, has given out the learnings for India's foreign policy and how Lord Curzon tackled the challenge of China at that point of time. Probably we could take a leaf out of that book today in contemporary relevant times. So Curzon, although being a British master, first point that Curzon said was exercising influence over geopolitical space beyond India's own shores. India has to look beyond its shores. The day India looks from Gulf of Aden till the Gulf of Malacca and through the sea, and India secures its sea, till only that time India remains secure. So the British Empire that was there, this was the feeling that he expressed. When does New Delhi feel secure? When the sea lines of communication are in its influence. When the Gulf of Aden is taken care of by the Indian Navy, till the Gulf of Malacca is taken care of by the Indian Navy. New Delhi feels secure. The Indian Ocean, it's in its influence, in its grasp. First is to not lose hold of this grasp. The second learning is India's main landward attention must be directed at frontiers. The frontier, keeping the spaces in friendly hands. India's frontiers in the northwest, India's frontiers in the south, India's frontiers in the neighborhood have to be in friendly neighborhood. What happens when India's neighbors are friendly to New Delhi? It saves on India's defenses. It saves on India's resources. It gives India that kind of security from the giant, the dragon that sits across the Himalayas, that is China. The third point of Lord Curzon, he says, is influence neighborhood. You have to exercise and influence your neighborhood. Now, he very deftly analyzed the neighborhood of India when British Empire was there. And he said there are small neighbors sitting across India. There has to be greater integration of neighboring states into Indian economy and infrastructure. Let's get in Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal and integrate with Indian economy and Indian infrastructure. Let's make them dependent in some form. Dependent is again the wrong word, so to say, but let's just integrate them in some form. When you integrate them, you exercise surmountable amount of influence over them. The last part of this is again, the policy of all of this is doing a Sagar Manthan, utilizing the waters of India. India has a whole Indian Ocean at its expose, and using the maritime security, using the maritime safety, using blue water economy, usage of its water, Project Mosam, Sagar, Spice Route, IOR, IAC, IORA, IONS, Blue Water Policy, also the Blue Water Policy of Almeida, the Portuguese ruler. So there are clues from Indian history which we could implement, which are relevant till today. The Portuguese Viceroy is Almeida. He says for India's safety and for the Goa safety security, Indian Ocean has to be always within the sphere of India. And when China is challenging the Indian authority in Indian Ocean now, it's again a worry. So all of this put together, I present a new perspective of looking at India. First is the security aspect of Northwest, then is the nationalism aspect of the Northwest. Third is all of you, those who are listening digitally as well, just imagine India to be upside down. Just imagine India to be upside down. The south is the north and north is the south. Now who's decided this direction? We don't need to call north as the north. It's just for convenience, right? It's not some marker. We could call the south the north and north the south, doesn't matter. Just for strategic thinking, see if the perspective changes. Just imagine India upside down. The south is the north and north is the south. Now let's see what India has done. China has done. Chinese investment in Djibouti, Chinese investment in Mauritius, Chinese investment in Sri Lanka, Chinese investment in Seychelles, Chinese investment in Maldives, in Lanka, in Myanmar, and in the Christmas Islands near Indonesia. The threat is also from the south. So the gravity of the threat is imagined when we understand India. The south is the north and north is the south. Imagine Chennai being the northmost tip of Indian continent, the Indian peninsula. Will we understand the importance of the Indian Ocean? Therefore, it's that line that I'm looking at continuously. that attracts my attention when I think there is a line of Tropic of Cancer. In order to introduce some specialization in foreign policy, there has to be a specialized distinction between the North and the South, where the South looks at foreign policy differently and the North looks at foreign policy differently. Both of them specialized, amalgamate themselves into having a pan-India Indian foreign policy. Because specialization is again an aspect that needs to be introduced in Indian foreign policy. Lastly, I have been saying lastly, and now this is the third time that I've said lastly, but this is lastly. Lastly, I think we need to tackle these three diseases in foreign policy that we have. First disease is the big brotherly syndrome. Disease, it's a foreign policy disease, big brotherly syndrome. When we talk to any smaller country, we behave like a big brother. But we must understand that countries are vying for equality. We live in a day and an age where people inherently do not like hierarchy. It's a very first instinct that they have. And since they have to operate, they would operate even without liking it. But this is a disease, that is big brotherly syndrome. You inherently feel superior just by the very size of the Indian economy, just by the size of India's geography. When you talk to Bhutan, you feel that you're a big brother, right? This is syndrome. It's a big brotherly syndrome. The next disease that we're going to have to tackle is the Panipat syndrome. This is again a disease that we have in foreign policy. Just like how we have diseases in an organism, organelle, biology. This is a disease in foreign policy, Panipat syndrome. That we prepare for our security when the enemy is on the gates of Panipat and Delhi faces. We need to be a little visionary. We need to envisage and have that vision of a threat that is coming from afar. We need to develop that vision. So, and the last disease is binary disease, the binary syndrome. We cannot be looking at the world in terms of black and white. We need to look at the world in terms of grey. There is no black and white, so to say. It's all grey. And this careful, calibrated hedging is required in terms of the binary syndrome that we have. So foreign policy has many lessons from history, geography, culture, economics, and a lot of other aspects also from an individual's life. And just like how we have environment impact assessment for any developmental project, I propose we have a foreign policy impact assessment also in terms of deciding a foreign policy or in terms of deciding a legislation, for example. Now, CANRC has both positive and negative implications. Internally, externally, it's a debatable issue. You are entitled to have your own opinion on that. But it largely has had a negative impact on Bangladesh, on relations with Bangladesh, because it clearly calls out names of neighbors in terms of Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and thus does not boil down well with Bangladesh, because it clearly suggests that Bangladesh is not taking care of its minorities. Now, I'm not going into the question of whether that is true or false. It just creates an impression. So just like when we have environment impact assessment, we should at least have a foreign policy impact assessment, so to say, with all this. And with all this, let me go back to the story of the Magadha, Avanti, Vatsala, and Koshala that I was talking about. Now, when you have all these global empires and this theory is competing each other, I'm going to connect those dots and say to you at the end, the first story that I told you about in terms of Mahajanpada is also it's this craftiness and this multipolar world that there is today. Similarly situates the world in terms of Magadha, Vatsa, Kosala, Avanti. We cannot be repeating these same mistakes again and again. According to my analysis, any bipolar division of the world is not suitable for India. Any unipolar world division of the world is not suitable for India. Supremacy of the United States of America, not suitable for India. The division of world into India, America and China, not suitable for India. Multipolar world, okayish for India. What suits for India and Indian development and Indian developmental aspect are the aspects of a rules-based order, because that will buy us time for internal development. only when we have a rules-based order in the world will we have time for internal development. And after discussing all of this and touching upon all of this aspect, now let me give you the definition of foreign policy, because foreign policy is the sum total of principles, interests, objectives and interests, a country's behavior politically, economically, socially, militarily, standards, culturally, geographically, historically, and it's the standards and the radiation of the outside world internally to the external world. So foreign policy is not just the job of the government. Students now walking on the streets of the United States, or businessman doing his business in Singapore, is conducting a foreign policy. The day we realize that foreign policy is still being conducted when I bore you here and you sleep, it's still being conducted. It's a present continuous tense. So definition is changing, it's ever changing, and the scope is huge. So after dwelling on every sort and possible dimension, let me just give you the overall view of how I see this personally. And I can, I see that in life in general, in an individual's life and in a life of a nation, there are controllables and there are non-controllables. Whatever I have discussed are some of the controllables that we could hedge and maneuver and have in our favor. But after that, there are some uncontrollables in foreign policy. And we must recognize those uncontrollables, just like how we recognize these uncontrollables also in our individual lives. And I resonate well with W.B. Yeats when he wrote the poem in 1919, the poem The Second Coming. He says, things fall apart, the center can't hold. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at home. Things fall apart. Things fall apart in a relation. Things fall apart in a marriage. Things fall apart also in terms of state. States bifurcate. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, bifurcated. Sudan, South Sudan, bifurcated. It's very difficult to hold on to things that are naturally inclined and progressively moving on the outside. So all of this are the non-controllables that I see, which I don't really think we have enough control over. And you can then dwell into the areas of, luck or destiny, so to say, after you touch upon all these academic issues. And just the reminder of this poem that, gives to us that the more the things change, the more they remain the same. So, yes, that's all that I had for you in the time that I was allotted. I have exceeded by 5 minutes, and this was unfortunately the time that I had, but fortunately for you, it's over. So thank you so much, and thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you. And also, just the exercise that I do in class, when you introduce yourself, I see very unknown faces here. I want just the name, no surname, and the district that you come from. Just the name, no surname. You save your calories on the surname, but spend it on telling me the district that you come from. Surname's banned. If at all anyone has any questions. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Shreya.
Yeah.
I am from Ghaziabad, Uttar Pradesh.
Yes. Good.
So my question is, when we talked about challenges, do you think diversity in India is a challenge? Because the only reason that you stated that we are, the center we have is the Constitution.
Right.
And we have seen time and again that the Constitution has been in jeopardy.
Right.
Do you think diversity plays as a challenge in the country?
Right. The way I see it is, Shreya, that, it's a good question. And, just when you look at the diversity of India, it is both a challenge and an opportunity from the way I see it. But India, largely with the culture that I talked about, the history, geography that I talked about, is largely been a heterogeneous land. And first of all, we have to recognize this heterogeneity and see all the parameters or all the Siemens that could bind us together. And the concept that I talked about was civic republicanism, where we shed out or keep other identities as secondary to the primary identity of Indianness. And the reason behind your question is diversities, and to amalgamate this diversity it's a very difficult task, because you center around a concept which is new and that is not familiar to you. This concept of Indianness, not very familiar. Concept of caste, your gender comes very close to you. From the way I look at it, I think the diversity in India is the strength of India. It's the strength of India. Look at what is happening in Europe. When Samuel Huntington talks about the clash of civilization, he says civilizations are clashing because you have hatred for one particular religion. And that is not the case in India at all. When you see in India a national identity that is there are many religions that coexist together. There are many syncretic traditions that coexist together, right? So when you have this, it can be a guiding force for the world when the world enters multiculturalism. Now when there's large-scale migration in the United Kingdom, where there is large-scale migration from Afghanistan, from Syria, from all these countries, people from a particular religion are going to that country. And India could actually teach them how to coexist. When the world is becoming more and more diverse, when the world is becoming, there are challenges in terms of diversity. This land of subcontinentality could itself present, it could itself present itself as an example in terms of multiculturalism before these countries. And how do you hold a nation together with so much of diversity? And of course, there are challenges in terms of, many issues in terms of the challenges that you talked about for the diversity that we have. But I feel India has always been under strain. It's been a land of irony. India has been a land of agony and the ecstasy. India has also been a land of million mutinies, as and when I talk. So India is both a land of yes and no's, and challenges are no different to us. We've always had these challenges of challenging the diversity, and we've always bounced back. So this stresses and strains, I'm not very concerned about them. They're like bubbles which come and go. That's my opinion on that.
Good afternoon, sir. Check.
Yeah. You're audible.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Abhishek. I'm from the Pune district.
Yeah.
Sir, I have two questions. The first one being that, given the fact that until today we have failed at amalgamating the diversity in India, do you think it is time to start taking measures to enter a homogeneous society of any sort? That's my first question. And my second question is, now that US seems to have lost an incredible amount of credibility owing to the Afghanistan situation, do you think it is time to formalize the big brother syndrome that you talk about and actually be big brother in certain situations? For example, active intervention in Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah. Just remind me if I forget the second question. Coming to your first question. When you talk about homogeneity, how do you introduce homogeneity in a land where there's so much diversity already that is prevalent? The diversity is prevalent. It's out there for everyone to see. When they've rooted, the diversity is rooted in the soil and in the customs and cultures of India. That only way to tackle the challenges of this diversity is to strengthen the diversity. Because when you make someone feel at home, that person is going to give 100% to what that person commits to. If you make someone feel a secondary citizen, or if anyone feels a secondary citizen, that person will somehow be a potential target of exploitation by the enemy state. So the diversity, the solution for the challenge of diversity is more diversity. The challenge of democracy is more democratization. It's this aspect and the promotion of this concept somewhere that I feel is very, very important. Because how do you introduce homogeneity in a land that is exhaustively diverse? How is this possible? Is what I could think of. And if we are to revolve everyone around a common centaur, we need to take a longer route. It's a lot of hard work for everyone to identify himself or herself to be an Indian first at heart. Because just when we think on every certain aspects, we think in terms of many identity markers that we have. And I acknowledge that it is a challenge to think for everyone in terms of just by being a sheer Indian. Right? So just by being a sheer Indian. Now, how many of you would just marry in a different religion just because you're an Indian? How easy is that coming? The proportion of resistance and the proportion of amount of friction that you could face from communities and societies is immense in your own geography and locality. So you have swaths and patches of geographies that are looking inwards. We need to look outside. The second question that was related to Afghanistan was the big brother syndrome. I don't actually think that this is being big brotherly if we play an active role in Afghanistan. I think we need to be assertive. And, you know, this is an immoral stance, and at the cost of going a little immoral, I feel we should also, and we must also talk to Taliban. When China is talking to Taliban, when Pakistan is obviously talking to Taliban, it's imperative for us also to engage with that power, because this is the reality of the day. It is the reality of the day that the whole of Afghanistan is under their influence, is under their power. Now, the stance that the Indian government has taken, it's a little contrary to my own opinion. They've taken a stance wherein they're not talking and actively engaging with Taliban. They were actively engaging, and we betted on the Ghani government. And it was a bet that we had. And we've lost out on that bet, unfortunately, in that term. The foreign policy largely, after 2014, has largely been active and engaging and pretty good. But in Afghanistan is a challenge that is going to pose a security threat to them. So we need to be assertive. We could be engaging, but big brotherly syndrome is behaving, like a big brother, like a brother who bullies us. It has some negative connotations. That is not something that we could do there. I think we need, again, a different strategy to talk to Taliban in order to save on to the Indian resources, Indian military resources, and also to lessen the strain on the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Yeah.
You say that we should commence talks with the Taliban, but
Yeah.
do we really want to head down a path where we recognize the establishment of a power that is very clearly against everything that India stands for?
Right. That's a good question. See, there is a difference between recognition that you award. Now, when the Taliban that was there in the earlier old regime, there were only few countries that recognized formally the government there. This is Saudi Arabia and I think United Arab Emirates and Pakistan. So it's not about recognition. It's about safeguarding our own frontiers and safeguarding our own borders. And it is not a new proposition that I'm saying. In Qatar, in Doha, the Indian back-channel diplomacy was already engaging with Taliban. So we are already talking with Taliban. It is just that the Chinese foreign minister talks with Taliban. He invites them to Xinjiang and safeguards and, shakes hands. It's that kind of thing that I'm talking about, more so explicitly, because it is the reality that if they are to rule Afghanistan henceforth, then we must all remember that Kashmir borders with Afghanistan. Pakistan occupied Kashmir borders with Afghanistan. It's a very, yeah.
First question.
Right.
Shouldn't we be taking active measures to go against Afghanistan at this point?
See, I could talk about engagement with Afghanistan, not necessarily against Afghanistan. Not necessarily against Afghanistan. We could be more assertive. And yes, in the UN now, with the external minister speaking yesterday and day before, we are heading towards having an assertive foreign policy stance with respect to Afghanistan, but not in terms of attacking Afghanistan or so to say. But yes, you are right that I don't think that necessarily needs a disagreement from my side when I say that we need to actively engage with Afghanistan, because it's a border that we share. The US will go out of Afghanistan. Everyone would go out of Afghanistan. Russia would go out of Afghanistan. India, even if it chooses, cannot. Why? We border with Afghanistan. We share a border. It could enter. And we've seen what was happening in 1989, right? With the terrorism, the wave of terrorism that struck Kashmir in 1990s. Also depicted in films like Rosa and all those. Yeah, so yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I am Urja and I'm from Pune district.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for delivering such different opinions and visions at the same time on the foreign policy.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first one is when you talked about the visions, you told that a bipolar or a unipolar division wouldn't work. A multi will be sort of okayish.
Yeah.
However, a rules-based order would work.
Yes.
But when we talk from a realistic approach of this
Right.
rules-based order, there would be some or the other authority who would be again creating rules.
Right.
And wouldn't it be the nations already developed or already having a hegemony over other nations who will create these rules
Right.
and again be the sort of torchbearer for the order that is being implemented?
Right.
So how would that work more efficiently in
Right.
this regard?
Yes, I'll just answer the first question. Yes, you are right. So I am basically talking in relative terms. What if we have a bipolar world? We need to choose sides. And if that crystallizes, that puts more compulsions on what India can do. And the aspect that I talked about, controllables and non-controllables in life, we will have less of controllables and more of non-controllables. Because if you are engaged in a block, if you supposing, for example, in a US block, it's very difficult to manage relations with Iran, which is readily offering oil India at a very subsidized rate. Oil. It is very difficult to operate with Venezuela, which is ready to India, which is ready for, ready to offer India oil at a very subsidized rate. It's very difficult to manage relations with all these countries, and there are non-controllables which outweigh the controllables in the bipolar order. Let's look at multipolar, and you are right in shaping that even if we have a rules-based order, those rules are shaped by global hegemons that are there. But that has always been the case. There are some elites in the world in terms of power diplomacy, and then there are some developed countries which shape the rules. But having a rules-based order, and if India aligns itself with that rules-based order in terms of the domestic compulsions and in terms of domestic equations that we have. For example, let's say US makes all the rules. But US has a lot of convergence with India also in terms of rules. It's a rules-based order. India believes in rule of law. United States believes in rule of law. So there are a lot of convergence in terms of preambly values. Even if that is made by the United States of America, it will be relatively better than what would it be in a unipolar or a multipolar world. Because it will be based by consensus, like for example, when we sign environmental treaties, WTO treaties, it is based on discussions and compulsions, so on and so forth. Of course, they have an upper hand because of the power asymmetry that you have. But in relative terms, that is better. I'm not looking at the ideal picture. Rules-based order is no ideal world. I'm looking at the less worse picture. That is a pragmatic picture, or the best practicable picture that is workable. So in terms of that, and to be able to buy time, we will be able to grow, we will be able to buy time. And by that time, if we are in a position where we are able to frame rules, then probably we will not wish for a rules-based order.
On northwestern frontiers and the borders.
Right.
However, looking in the past, say 5 to 6 years, the northeastern states the boundaries for that matter have proved to be volatile in some sense,
Right.
or they've started to feel a bit away from what the whole country thinks or the ideology that the whole
Right.
country proliferates or believes into.
Yeah.
So, what would be your stance for having a foreign policy? Because in the beginning you mentioned that the domestic affairs are a radiation of the foreign policy. So, how do the domestic affairs of northeastern India, and how could we have an globalistic or an accumulative kind of foreign policy taking into consideration the northeast states as well?
Right. So I think this is a very good question, because this challenge is a new challenge before this generation. Because if you look at the history of India, you haven't had a threat coming from the northeast. it's always the role that Himalayas have played. Just like I talked about Sagar Manthan, Himalayas had a substantial amount of role to play in terms of safeguarding of the northeast, because the Chinese have not come from the northeast, because there is this huge division of Himalayas, and it has been a protective barriers, not just in terms of climate and not just a contributor in terms of monsoons, but also in the external security threat of India. Now with rising China is, remember, it's we're talking in terms of China. China's not just a nation. China is a civilization just like India. It is an emotional connect to its past. It wears its emotions, the history, emotions and patriotism on its sleeves, and tries to make the Silk Road and all of that and going back to the past, because it basks in that glory of the great Chinese culture that they have. Vijay Gokhale, again, the ex-foreign secretary, he speaks about the lack of understanding of China and the lack of understanding of the northeastern border. This is a new challenge that is emerging. As and when China rises and asserts very actively in the northeast, it is going to spread, the dragon, so to say, is going to spread its tentacles in the northeast, in India, also troubling Japan, South Korea, also South China Sea, troubling Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam. All of these are under strain because China is rising. It's trying to actively assert itself on all the border frontiers and all territories. Now, this is a challenge that China poses in the northeast, and I just feel that Khanti Vajpayee's views, so to say, in understanding the Chinese society, in understanding the Chinese foreign policy, in understanding the Chinese way of behavior and the nature, is very important, because the 4 P's that she talked about, parameters, so on and so forth, perception also, right, is an important role to play. And just like how Nirupama Rao also says that we need a lot of deftness in conversing with the Chinese. And also, with this question, I remember I also propose that when you talk to countries which have strained relation with you, when we talked during the times of Doklam diplomacy almost prevented a war in Sikkim. So that is what diplomacy can do. During the times of Doklam, now the Galvan Valley, it promoted this. To answer your question specifically, I think from all my observations, and this might just be a loose opinion, but I think the more the women are in foreign policy, the more the deftness foreign policy could have in diplomacy also, while talking to countries which have, disputing relations with India. Now, just imagine 6 women diplomats talking to Pakistan. It will introduce altogether a new dimension of giving a external security angle to talking to Pakistan. It would just feminize and civilize the whole diplomatic procedure, just like how it would do on the northeastern border. So that's just a loose opinion that I hold. I think we could try that out on an experimental basis, probably. Thank you. Good that I said women, because there are a lot of women in the audience. No. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.